Question 1. The analysis reveals a large chemical manufacturing facility has experienced a significant fire involving volatile organic compounds. Firefighting efforts are underway, and the incident commander is considering the use of a foam suppression agent. However, preliminary information suggests that runoff from the foam could potentially enter a nearby sensitive wetland ecosystem, which is protected under federal environmental legislation. The emergency manager must advise the incident commander on the most appropriate course of action regarding suppression agent selection and containment. Option A. Request that the fire department use only water for suppression, despite the potential for increased fire duration and risk, to completely avoid any possibility of chemical contamination from suppression agents. Option B. Halt all firefighting operations until a comprehensive environmental impact study can be completed to determine the exact ecological risks of any foam runoff. Option C. Prioritize the use of a foam suppression agent that is known to be less environmentally persistent and implement immediate containment measures for all runoff, coordinating with environmental agencies to manage the collected runoff. Option D. Immediately deploy the most effective foam suppression agent available to extinguish the fire as quickly as possible, deferring any environmental containment or cleanup considerations until after the fire is fully under control. Correct answer is C. Prioritize the use of a foam suppression agent that is known to be less environmentally persistent and implement immediate containment measures for all runoff, coordinating with environmental agencies to manage the collected runoff. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where an emergency manager must balance immediate life safety concerns with the potential for long-term environmental impact during a significant industrial fire. This is professionally challenging because the urgency of firefighting operations can sometimes lead to decisions that, while effective in suppressing flames, might inadvertently exacerbate environmental damage or violate specific environmental protection regulations. The decision-making process requires a nuanced understanding of both emergency response protocols and relevant environmental laws, ensuring that the chosen suppression methods are not only effective, but also compliant and minimize secondary harm. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a coordinated response that integrates fire suppression tactics with environmental mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of comprehensive emergency management, which emphasizes all hazards preparedness and response, including consideration for environmental consequences. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of regulations that mandate the protection of natural resources and public health, often requiring the use of less environmentally harmful suppression agents when feasible and effective. This approach demonstrates a commitment to responsible stewardship and adherence to legal mandates for environmental protection during emergency incidents. An incorrect approach that solely focuses on rapid extinguishment, without considering the environmental impact of the chosen suppression agents, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure could lead to significant regulatory violations, such as exceeding permissible discharge limits for hazardous substances into waterways or soil, as stipulated by environmental protection laws. Ethically, it represents a disregard for the broader public good and the long-term health of the community and ecosystem. Another incorrect approach, which involves delaying suppression to conduct an exhaustive environmental impact assessment before any action is taken, is also professionally unacceptable. While environmental considerations are crucial, the primary mandate in an active fire incident is to protect life and prevent catastrophic structural collapse. Unnecessary delays in firefighting can lead to increased risk to responders and the public, and potentially greater overall damage, violating the fundamental principles of emergency response and potentially contravening regulations that require prompt action to mitigate immediate threats. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a rapid assessment of the immediate threats to life and property, followed by an immediate consultation with environmental specialists or review of pre-incident environmental plans. This allows for the selection of suppression methods that are both effective against the fire and compliant with environmental regulations. It requires clear communication channels between the fire command and environmental oversight, fostering a collaborative approach to incident management that addresses all critical aspects of the emergency. Question 2. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a coastal community faces a high probability of hurricanes and significant storm surge events, a moderate probability of hazardous materials spills from nearby industrial facilities, and a low but potentially catastrophic probability of a cyber attack targeting critical infrastructure. Which of the following approaches best aligns with comprehensive emergency management principles and regulatory expectations for prioritizing preparedness efforts? Option A. Allocate the majority of preparedness resources to hurricane and storm surge mitigation and response, as these are the most frequent and visible threats. Option B. Concentrate preparedness resources on hazardous materials incidents, as these require specialized equipment and training that are often overlooked in general disaster planning. Option C. Develop a balanced preparedness strategy that addresses the unique risks posed by hurricanes, hazardous materials incidents, and cyber attacks, considering their potential impact and likelihood. Option D. Focus preparedness efforts primarily on the cyber attack risk due to its potentially catastrophic, albeit low probability, nature, as this represents the most significant existential threat. The correct answer is A. Allocate the majority of preparedness resources to hurricane and storm surge mitigation and response, as these are the most frequent and visible threats. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an emergency manager to prioritize limited resources and attention across a spectrum of potential hazards, each with distinct characteristics and impacts. The challenge lies in moving beyond a simple cataloging of hazards to a nuanced understanding of their interdependencies, cascading effects, and the varying levels of preparedness required. Effective emergency management demands a proactive, risk-informed approach that anticipates the most probable and impactful threats, rather than reacting solely to immediate or familiar dangers. This requires a deep understanding of the specific regulatory framework governing emergency management within the relevant jurisdiction, ensuring that all actions align with legal mandates and established best practices. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a comprehensive, multi-hazard risk assessment that considers the probability and potential impact of each hazard type. This aligns with the core principles of emergency management as outlined in relevant U.S. federal regulations, such as those derived from the Stafford Act and the National Incident Management System, NIMS. NIMS, in particular, promotes a standardized, all-hazards approach to incident management, requiring preparedness for a wide range of events. A thorough risk assessment, which includes evaluating natural, technological, and human-caused hazards, allows for the development of integrated mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery strategies. This approach ensures that resources are allocated effectively to address the most significant threats, fostering resilience across the community. It also supports compliance with FEMA guidance on hazard mitigation planning, which mandates the identification and analysis of risks. Incorrect approaches analysis, focusing solely on natural hazards, while important, represents a regulatory and ethical failure because it neglects significant threats from technological and human-caused events. U.S. emergency management frameworks, including FEMA directives, explicitly require consideration of all hazard types. Ignoring technological incidents like hazardous materials releases or infrastructure failures, or human-caused events such as terrorism or cyber attacks, leaves the jurisdiction vulnerable and non-compliant with the all-hazards mandate. This narrow focus can lead to inadequate preparedness plans, misallocation of resources, and ultimately, a failure to protect the public. Prioritizing only the most visually dramatic or historically recent hazards is also a flawed approach. While recency and visibility can inform risk perception, they are not reliable indicators of future risk. Regulatory frameworks emphasize data-driven, objective risk assessments. Relying on subjective perceptions or anecdotal evidence without a systematic analysis can lead to a mischaracterization of actual risks, leaving critical vulnerabilities unaddressed. This can be seen as a failure to adhere to the principles of sound risk management and potentially a violation of due diligence requirements. Relying exclusively on external threat intelligence without internal vulnerability assessments is another critical failure. While understanding external threats is crucial, effective emergency management requires a holistic view that includes understanding the community's specific vulnerabilities to various hazards. U.S. emergency management doctrine stresses the importance of understanding both threats and vulnerabilities to develop appropriate protective measures. An approach that overlooks internal weaknesses, such as aging infrastructure or critical dependencies, fails to meet the comprehensive risk assessment requirements mandated by federal guidelines. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic, data-driven risk assessment process that integrates multiple hazard types. This involves 1. Identifying all potential hazards within the jurisdiction, categorizing them as natural, technological, or human-caused. 2. Analyzing the probability of occurrence and the potential impact, e.g., loss of life, economic disruption, environmental damage, for each identified hazard. 3. Considering the interdependencies and cascading effects between different hazard types. 4. Evaluating the jurisdiction's existing capabilities and vulnerabilities. 5. Prioritizing hazards based on a combination of probability and impact, informed by regulatory requirements and best practices. 6. Developing and implementing integrated strategies for mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery that address the prioritized risks. This structured approach ensures that emergency management efforts are comprehensive, effective, and compliant with all applicable laws and guidelines. Question 3. The evaluation methodology shows that a community is highly vulnerable to coastal flooding and storm surge. Considering the principles of disaster preparedness and financial resilience, which of the following strategies best aligns with a proactive approach to mitigating the financial impact of such events on residents? Option A. Promoting the purchase of expensive, specialized disaster preparedness gear that may not be covered by insurance and is secondary to essential financial protection. Option B. Advocating for the immediate construction of elevated homes without first ensuring residents have adequate insurance coverage for potential damage. Option C. Focusing solely on the development of evacuation plans and emergency shelters, assuming government aid will cover all subsequent financial losses. Option D. Encouraging residents to secure flood insurance policies that cover structural damage and contents, and to maintain an emergency savings fund for immediate out-of-pocket expenses. The correct answer is D. Encouraging residents to secure flood insurance policies that cover structural damage and contents, and to maintain an emergency savings fund for immediate out-of-pocket expenses. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an emergency manager to balance the immediate needs of disaster response with the long-term financial resilience of individuals and communities. Effective insurance and financial preparedness are critical components of a robust disaster management plan, yet they are often overlooked or misunderstood. The challenge lies in translating complex financial concepts into actionable advice and ensuring that preparedness measures are accessible and appropriate for diverse populations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core principles of disaster preparedness as outlined in relevant U.S. federal guidelines, such as those promoted by FEMA. Specifically, it emphasizes proactive risk assessment and the utilization of insurance as a primary financial tool for recovery. This aligns with the regulatory framework that encourages individuals and communities to build financial capacity to withstand and recover from disasters, thereby reducing reliance on public assistance and accelerating the return to normalcy. It demonstrates a commitment to comprehensive emergency management by integrating financial planning into the broader disaster preparedness strategy. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate relief efforts without considering pre-disaster financial mitigation fails to adhere to the principles of sustainable disaster resilience. This oversight can lead to prolonged recovery periods and increased long-term economic vulnerability for affected populations. Ethically, it represents a failure to adequately prepare and inform stakeholders about available resources and strategies for financial recovery. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes expensive, non-essential preparedness measures over foundational insurance coverage demonstrates a misunderstanding of risk prioritization. Some advanced preparedness measures are valuable. Neglecting basic financial protection through insurance leaves individuals and communities exposed to significant financial loss that could be mitigated. This approach may also be seen as fiscally irresponsible, as it diverts resources from more critical protective measures. A further incorrect approach that relies exclusively on government aid as the sole recovery mechanism is problematic. While government assistance is vital, it is often insufficient to cover all losses and may come with limitations and delays. Over-reliance on this single source neglects the importance of personal responsibility and proactive financial planning, which are encouraged by federal disaster management policies to foster self-sufficiency and expedite recovery. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough risk assessment, identifying potential disaster impacts and their associated financial consequences. This should be followed by an evaluation of available financial tools, with a strong emphasis on insurance as a primary protective measure. Education and outreach are crucial to ensure that individuals and communities understand their risks and the benefits of various financial preparedness strategies. Finally, integrating these financial preparedness measures into broader emergency management plans ensures a holistic and effective approach to disaster resilience. Question 4. During the evaluation of an existing emergency operations plan, EOP, a community group representing individuals with specific mobility challenges approaches the emergency manager, requesting immediate inclusion of specialized evacuation procedures for their members within the plan. They highlight that current general evacuation protocols may not adequately address their unique needs during a rapidly evolving incident. Which of the following actions best upholds the integrity and effectiveness of the EOP's plan components while addressing the stakeholders' concern? Option A. Immediately direct response personnel to follow the requested specialized procedures during any ongoing or future incidents, without formally updating the EOP to ensure immediate support for the community group. Option B. Add the specialized evacuation procedures as a separate, informal addendum to the EOP that is only shared with the community group to avoid disrupting the established plan structure for other stakeholders. Option C. Initiate the formal EOP amendment process to incorporate the specialized evacuation procedures, ensuring they are integrated into the relevant sections such as concept of operations, organization and assignment of responsibilities, and resource management, and communicated to all relevant agencies and stakeholders. Option D. Advise the community group that the EOP is a comprehensive document and that their specific needs cannot be accommodated outside of the existing general procedures, as the plan's scope is fixed. Correct answer is C. Initiate the formal EOP amendment process to incorporate the specialized evacuation procedures, ensuring they are integrated into the relevant sections such as concept of operations, organization and assignment of responsibilities, and resource management, and communicated to all relevant agencies and stakeholders. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an emergency manager to balance the immediate needs of a specific stakeholder group with the overarching requirements of a comprehensive emergency operations plan, EOP. The pressure to deliver immediate assistance can sometimes lead to overlooking or compromising essential plan components, which can have long-term negative consequences for overall preparedness and response effectiveness. Careful judgment is required to ensure that immediate actions align with, rather than undermine, the established framework of the EOP. Correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the integrity and functionality of the EOP. By ensuring that the proposed changes are integrated into the plan through established amendment procedures, the emergency manager upholds the principles of organized and documented emergency management. This aligns with the fundamental tenets of emergency management planning, which emphasize a systematic, documented, and adaptable approach. Specifically, it respects the plan components as outlined in standard emergency management guidelines, ensuring that the purpose, scope, situation analysis, assumptions, concept of operations, organization and assignment of responsibilities, direction and control, communication, resource management, and appendices remain coherent and effective. Adhering to these procedures ensures that all stakeholders are aware of changes, that the plan remains a valid operational document, and that future responses are based on an up-to-date and approved framework. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate stakeholder request without considering the EOP structure and amendment process represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses the established protocols for plan modification, which are designed to ensure that changes are vetted, approved, and communicated to all relevant parties. This can lead to inconsistencies within the plan, confusion during actual emergencies, and a breakdown in the chain of command or resource allocation. Ethically, it fails to treat all stakeholders equitably by prioritizing one group's immediate needs over the systematic preparedness of the entire community. Furthermore, it can create a precedent for ad hoc decision-making, undermining the credibility and reliability of the EOP as a guiding document. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing the requested changes without documenting them in the plan's appendices or organization and assignment of responsibility sections is also a failure. The appendices and organizational sections are critical for detailing specific roles, responsibilities, and supporting information. Failing to update these means that the official plan does not reflect the actual operational reality, leading to confusion about who is responsible for what, how resources are managed, and how communication channels are established during an event. This directly contravenes the purpose of these plan components, which is to provide clarity and structure for effective response. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Acknowledge and validate the stakeholders' concern and the urgency of their request. 2. Review the existing Emergency Operations Plan, EOP, to determine how the request aligns with or deviates from current provisions, particularly in areas like concept of operations, organization and assignment of responsibilities, and resource management. 3. Assess the potential impact of the requested change on the overall purpose and scope of the plan. 4. Determine if the request necessitates a formal amendment to the EOP. If so, initiate the established amendment process, which typically involves review, approval by relevant authorities, and dissemination of the updated plan. 5. If immediate action is required and the EOP does not explicitly prohibit it, consider issuing a temporary directive or guidance that clearly states it is a provisional measure pending formal plan amendment, ensuring it does not contradict the spirit or intent of the existing plan. 6. Communicate the process and expected timeline for addressing the request to the stakeholder. Question 5. System analysis indicates that following a significant disruptive event, an Associate Emergency Manager, AEM, is tasked with ensuring the continued operation of their agency's critical services. Considering the requirements of U.S. federal continuity policy, which of the following approaches best exemplifies a robust continuity of operations planning (COOP) strategy? Option A. Focus primarily on assessing physical damage to primary facilities and initiating repair efforts as quickly as possible. Option B. Concentrate on restoring non-essential services first to demonstrate a return to normalcy for the broader public. Option C. Implement informal communication protocols and rely on the spontaneous coordination of personnel to manage the continuity of operations. Option D. Prioritize the immediate identification and protection of essential functions. Develop detailed plans for their sustained performance at alternate locations, and establish redundant communication channels. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the immediate identification and protection of essential functions. Develop detailed plans for their sustained performance at alternate locations, and establish redundant communication channels. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in emergency management, balancing the immediate need for operational continuity with the long-term strategic goals of resilience and adaptation. The professional challenge lies in discerning which approach best aligns with the principles of continuity of operations planning (COOP), as defined by U.S. federal regulations, specifically Presidential Policy Directive 40, PPD 40, and the National Continuity Policy Implementation Plan, NCPIP. These documents emphasize the need for a robust, integrated, and adaptable continuity capability that ensures the performance of essential functions under all circumstances. The difficulty arises from the potential for short-sighted solutions that address immediate needs but fail to build lasting resilience, or, conversely, overly ambitious plans that are impractical to implement. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on identifying and prioritizing essential functions, developing viable relocation strategies, and establishing clear communication protocols. This aligns directly with the core tenets of PPD 40 and NCPIP, which mandate the identification of essential functions, the development of robust plans to sustain them, and the establishment of alternate operating facilities and communication systems. This approach represents best professional practice because it is grounded in regulatory requirements and promotes a systematic, risk-based methodology for ensuring mission assurance. It prioritizes the most critical activities, ensuring that the organization can continue to operate even when its primary facilities are unavailable. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that solely focuses on immediate damage assessment and repair without considering the continuity of essential functions fails to meet the regulatory requirements of PPD-40 and NCPIP. This is a failure because COOP is not merely about physical restoration, but about maintaining critical operational capabilities. An approach that prioritizes the restoration of non-essential functions over essential ones is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It directly contradicts the fundamental purpose of COOP, which is to ensure the continuity of government and the performance of critical national functions. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the hierarchy of needs during a crisis. An approach that relies on ad hoc decision-making and informal communication channels during a disruption is a direct violation of the NCPIP emphasis on pre-established plans, procedures, and communication systems. This creates unacceptable risks and undermines the organization's ability to respond effectively and maintain public trust. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach COOP planning by first understanding the specific regulatory framework governing their jurisdiction, in this case, U.S. Federal Continuity Policy. This involves a thorough review of PPD-40 and NCPIP. The process should then involve a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities. Based on this assessment, essential functions must be identified and prioritized. For each essential function, viable strategies for continuity, including relocation, personnel, and technology, must be developed and documented in a formal COOP plan. Regular testing, training, and exercises are crucial to validate the plan and ensure personnel are prepared. Finally, the plan must be regularly reviewed and updated to reflect changes in threats, organizational structure, and operational requirements. Question 6. The efficiency study reveals that the current hazard profiling methodology for the jurisdiction is overly reliant on anecdotal evidence and lacks a systematic approach to quantifying the frequency, intensity, and geographic distribution of potential threats. Which of the following approaches best addresses this deficiency in accordance with established emergency management principles and regulatory expectations for hazard analysis? Option A. Implement a comprehensive data collection and analysis framework that integrates historical incident records, meteorological data, geological surveys, and demographic information to create a detailed, spatially explicit hazard profile. Option B. Conduct a series of public town hall meetings to solicit community input on perceived hazards and prioritize preparedness efforts based on the most frequently mentioned concerns. Option C. Focus exclusively on identifying and planning for the single most catastrophic hazard scenario identified in any historical event, regardless of its frequency. Option D. Rely primarily on the personal experience and institutional knowledge of long-serving emergency management personnel to identify and rank hazards. The correct answer is A. Implement a comprehensive data collection and analysis framework that integrates historical incident records, meteorological data, geological surveys, and demographic information to create a detailed, spatially explicit hazard profile. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an emergency manager to move beyond a general understanding of hazards to a nuanced, data-driven assessment of specific risks within their jurisdiction. The challenge lies in translating raw hazard characteristics, frequency, intensity, location, impact, into actionable strategies that are both effective and compliant with regulatory frameworks. The Associate Emergency Manager (AEM) certification implies a foundational understanding of these principles, but applying them in a real-world context, especially when resource allocation is implied, demands careful judgment. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with the core principles of hazard profiling as mandated by the National Incident Management System, NIMS, and the principles outlined in FEMA Hazard Mitigation Planning Guidance. NIMS emphasizes the importance of understanding the capabilities and limitations of the jurisdiction, which is directly informed by a thorough hazard profile. FEMA guidance stresses the need for a robust hazard analysis that considers historical data, geographic factors, and potential consequences to inform mitigation and preparedness efforts. This approach prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based methodology that is essential for developing credible and defensible emergency management plans. It ensures that decisions are grounded in the specific realities of the jurisdiction, rather than assumptions or generalized information. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical incident data without considering evolving environmental factors or demographic shifts fails to meet the dynamic nature of hazard assessment. This is a regulatory failure because it neglects the requirement for ongoing risk assessment and the incorporation of current scientific understanding, as often implied by state and federal emergency management directives. Ethically, it could lead to misallocation of resources and inadequate preparedness for future events. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on the most catastrophic potential impacts, ignoring less severe but more frequent events, is also professionally unacceptable. This represents a failure to adhere to a comprehensive risk assessment methodology. While preparing for the worst is important, neglecting the cumulative impact of smaller, more frequent hazards can lead to chronic disruption and strain on resources. This is a failure to meet the spirit of preparedness, which encompasses resilience against a spectrum of threats. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes perceived public concern over scientifically validated hazard data is a significant ethical and professional failing. Emergency managers are tasked with making decisions based on objective risk, not subjective perception. While public engagement is crucial, it should inform the communication and implementation of plans, not dictate the fundamental hazard assessment itself. This approach risks misdirecting resources and creating a false sense of security or undue alarm, undermining the credibility of the emergency management function. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured hazard identification and risk assessment framework. This begins with gathering comprehensive data on hazard characteristics, including historical frequency, intensity, geographic distribution, and potential consequences. This data should then be analyzed using established methodologies, considering both quantitative and qualitative factors. The results of this analysis should be used to prioritize hazards and inform the development of mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery strategies. Crucially, this process must be iterative, with regular reviews and updates to account for new data, changing conditions, and lessons learned from incidents. Collaboration with subject matter experts, stakeholders, and the public is vital throughout this process to ensure buy-in and the development of effective, community-supported plans. Question 7. Regulatory review indicates that developing and implementing effective warning systems is a critical component of emergency management. Considering the diverse needs of the population within a jurisdiction, which of the following approaches best ensures that a warning system is both compliant with regulations and operationally effective for all community members? Option A. Develop a system based on the assumption that all residents possess equal access to technology and are proficient in interpreting digital alerts. Option B. Focus on a single, highly reliable communication channel that has historically proven effective for the majority of the population. Option C. Prioritize the integration of the most advanced and widely adopted digital communication platform to maximize reach and speed of dissemination. Option D. Conduct extensive outreach and collaboration with a broad range of community stakeholders, including representatives from vulnerable populations, to inform the design and implementation of a multi-channel warning system. Correct answer is C. Prioritize the integration of the most advanced and widely adopted digital communication platforms to maximize reach and speed of dissemination. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because developing and implementing effective warning systems requires a delicate balance between technological capability, public accessibility, and stakeholder buy-in. The Associate Emergency Manager, AEM, must navigate diverse community needs, varying levels of technological literacy, and the critical need for timely and accurate information dissemination during emergencies. Failure to consider the full spectrum of stakeholders can lead to a system that is technically sound but practically ineffective, leaving vulnerable populations at risk. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive, multi-stakeholder engagement process. This aligns with the core principles of emergency management, which emphasize collaboration, inclusivity, and the development of resilient communities. By involving diverse stakeholders from the outset, the AEM ensures that the warning system design considers the unique needs and communication preferences of all segments of the population, including those with disabilities, limited English proficiency, or lack of access to certain technologies. This proactive approach fosters trust, enhances public understanding and compliance with warnings, and ultimately improves the overall effectiveness of the emergency management program. It also directly addresses regulatory requirements for equitable access to emergency information and services. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the most technologically advanced or widely adopted communication channels fails to meet regulatory obligations for equitable access. This can lead to a significant portion of the population being excluded from critical warnings, creating a public health and safety hazard. Ethically, it represents a failure to protect all members of the community. Another incorrect approach that relies on a single communication method, even if it reaches a large audience, is also problematic. Emergencies can disrupt specific communication networks, rendering a single point of failure system ineffective. This demonstrates a lack of foresight and preparedness, violating the professional duty to develop robust and redundant systems. Finally, an approach that bypasses community input and relies on assumptions about public needs risks creating a system that is not trusted or utilized by the very people it is intended to protect, undermining the entire purpose of the warning system. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough needs assessment, incorporating input from all relevant stakeholders, including community groups, public health officials, law enforcement, and vulnerable populations. This should be followed by a review of existing regulatory requirements and best practices for warning system design and implementation. The AEM should then evaluate various technological options based on their ability to reach diverse audiences, their reliability, and their cost-effectiveness, always prioritizing redundancy and accessibility. Pilot testing and ongoing evaluation with community feedback are crucial steps to ensure the system's continued effectiveness and adaptability. Question 8. The efficiency study reveals that during a recent large-scale wildfire response, the incident commander, Ike, faced significant delays in acquiring specialized fire suppression equipment due to lengthy procurement processes. To expedite operations, the IC considered several immediate actions to obtain the necessary resources. Which of the following actions, if taken, would best align with regulatory compliance and established emergency management best practices for resource acquisition during an incident? Option A. The IC initiated a formal request for the specialized equipment through the established Emergency Management Mutual Aid Network, ensuring all necessary documentation for tracking and accountability was initiated concurrently. Option B. The IC instructed personnel to use their personal tools and equipment that were similar in function to the needed specialized equipment, without formal integration into the incident resource inventory. Option C. The IC authorized the direct purchase of the equipment from a local vendor using a credit card, bypassing standard procurement protocols to ensure immediate availability. Option D. The IC informally contacted a neighboring jurisdiction's fire chief and arranged for the loan of similar equipment, with a verbal agreement to return it after the incident. The correct answer is A. The IC initiated a formal request for the specialized equipment through the established Emergency Management Mutual Aid Network, ensuring all necessary documentation for tracking and accountability was initiated concurrently. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term compliance and resource management, all within the context of a declared emergency. The pressure to act quickly can lead to shortcuts that violate established protocols and potentially compromise the safety and effectiveness of response operations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions taken during an emergency are both effective and legally sound. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the National Incident Management System, NIMS, principles, specifically those related to resource management and accountability. By initiating a formal request through the established channels, the incident commander, Ike, ensures that resources are properly documented, tracked, and accounted for, which is crucial for post-incident analysis, reimbursement, and future planning. This aligns with the core tenets of emergency management as outlined in federal guidelines, emphasizing systematic processes even under duress. An incorrect approach that involves bypassing established procurement procedures for immediate acquisition of essential equipment fails to uphold regulatory requirements for resource accountability and financial oversight. This can lead to unrecorded expenditures, potential misuse of funds, and difficulties in demonstrating the necessity and appropriateness of the resources obtained. Such an action undermines the integrity of the incident's financial management and can have legal and audit repercussions. Another incorrect approach, which involves relying solely on informal agreements with neighboring jurisdictions without formal mutual aid agreements or documentation, poses significant risks. While informal assistance can be valuable, it lacks the legal framework and established protocols for resource sharing, liability, and reimbursement. This can create confusion, disputes, and potential gaps in accountability, violating the spirit of structured interagency cooperation mandated by emergency management frameworks. Finally, an approach that involves utilizing personal equipment without proper vetting or integration into the incident's resource tracking system is problematic. While well-intentioned, this bypasses safety checks, compatibility assessments, and accountability measures. It can lead to the use of unsuitable or unsafe equipment and makes it impossible to accurately track the total resources deployed, impacting overall incident cost analysis and operational effectiveness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the immediate need, then immediately assesses how to meet that need within existing regulatory and procedural frameworks. This involves identifying the appropriate NIMS-compliant process for resource acquisition, whether through internal dispatch, mutual aid agreements, or emergency procurement. If existing procedures are insufficient for the urgency, the IC must still initiate the formal process and document any deviations or expedited actions, seeking necessary approvals and ensuring subsequent formalization. The focus should always be on maintaining accountability and compliance, even when operating under extreme time constraints. Question 9. Governance review demonstrates that the current standard operating procedures, SOP, for hazardous materials incident response have not been formally updated in 5 years. Considering the Associate Emergency Manager, AEM certifications focus on operational readiness and regulatory compliance. Which of the following actions best represents a professional and effective approach to addressing this situation? Option A. Rely on the experience of senior personnel to verbally guide response teams through any necessary deviations from the existing SOPs during an incident. Option B. Conduct a quick review of the SOPs, making only superficial changes to reflect the passage of time, without in-depth analysis of regulatory alignment or operational effectiveness. Option C. Immediately implement minor edits to the SOPs based on the most recent training materials used by the local fire department, assuming these reflect current best practices. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive review of the SOPs, comparing them against current federal and state hazardous materials regulations, industry best practices, and recent incident reports, followed by a validation phase for any proposed revisions. The correct answer is D. Initiate a comprehensive review of the SOPs, comparing them against current federal and state hazardous materials regulations, industry best practices, and recent incident reports, followed by a validation phase for any proposed revisions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in emergency management, ensuring that standard operating procedures, SOP, remain relevant, effective, and compliant with evolving regulatory requirements and best practices. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for established, reliable procedures with the imperative for continuous improvement and adaptation. A failure to adequately review and update SOPs can lead to operational inefficiencies, increased risk during emergencies, and potential noncompliance with governing regulations, impacting the safety of personnel and the public. Careful judgment is required to identify critical areas for revision and to implement changes in a structured and validated manner. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, evidence-based review of existing SOPs against current regulatory frameworks, operational data, and lessons learned from recent incidents or exercises. This process should involve subject matter experts and stakeholders to ensure practical applicability and buy-in. The validation of revised SOPs through pilot testing or tabletop exercises before full implementation is crucial for confirming their effectiveness and identifying any unintended consequences. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the need for SOPs to be current, accurate, and aligned with the Associate Emergency Manager, AEM, certification's emphasis on operational readiness and compliance. It adheres to the principle of continuous improvement, a cornerstone of effective emergency management, and ensures that procedures are not merely documented, but are functional and legally sound within the specified regulatory context. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on historical practice without formal review, assuming that because an SOP has been used in the past, it remains adequate. This fails to account for changes in technology, threat landscapes, or regulatory mandates, leading to potential noncompliance and operational deficiencies. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty to ensure the highest standards of preparedness. Another incorrect approach is to implement changes based on anecdotal feedback without a structured validation process. While feedback is valuable, making significant procedural changes without rigorous testing can introduce new risks or render the SOP ineffective in real-world scenarios. This bypasses the due diligence required by professional standards and regulatory oversight, potentially leading to confusion and errors during critical events. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of revision over thoroughness, making superficial updates without deep analysis of their impact. This can result in SOPs that appear updated but still contain critical flaws or omissions, failing to meet the intended purpose of enhancing operational effectiveness and safety. This approach undermines the integrity of the SOP development process and can lead to regulatory scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals in emergency management should adopt a cyclical approach to SOP management. This involves regular scheduled reviews, e.g., annually or biennially, triggered reviews, following significant incidents, exercises, or regulatory changes, and a robust process for proposing, evaluating, testing, and approving changes. The decision-making process should prioritize evidence, stakeholder input, and validation to ensure that SOPs are not only compliant but also practical, effective, and contribute to the overall resilience of the organization. This systematic approach mitigates risks, enhances operational performance, and upholds professional accountability. Question 10. Implementation of a comprehensive training and exercise program for an associate emergency manager requires a strategic approach to ensure maximum benefit for preparedness. Which of the following best describes the most effective and professionally responsible method for conducting drills, simulations, and tabletop exercises to test plans and improve preparedness? Option A. Implement exercises based on generic templates and checklists, with a primary goal of fulfilling compliance requirements for exercise frequency. Option B. Conduct a variety of exercises based on identified risks and plan objectives, followed by a thorough after-action review process that leads to documented improvement plans integrated into future training and plan revisions. Option C. Prioritize conducting a high volume of exercises annually, ensuring maximum participation from senior leadership, regardless of specific preparedness objectives being tested. Option D. Focus on replicating exercises from other jurisdictions that have experienced significant incidents, without significant adaptation to the local context. The correct answer is B. Conduct a variety of exercises based on identified risks and plan objectives, followed by a thorough after-action review process that leads to documented improvement plans integrated into future training and plan revisions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in emergency management, ensuring that training and exercise activities are not merely procedural checkboxes, but genuinely contribute to enhanced preparedness. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for comprehensive testing of plans with the practical constraints of time, resources, and personnel availability. AEMs must exercise sound judgment to select and implement exercises that yield the most valuable insights for improvement, rather than simply conducting a predetermined set of activities. The pressure to demonstrate preparedness often leads to a focus on the doing of exercises rather than the learning from them, which is a critical pitfall. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a systematic, iterative process that aligns exercises directly with identified risks and plan objectives. This involves a thorough after-action review process, where findings are documented, analyzed for root causes, and translated into actionable improvement plans. These plans are then integrated back into training, plan revisions, and future exercise designs. This cyclical approach ensures that exercises are not isolated events, but integral components of a continuous improvement cycle, directly addressing identified gaps and enhancing the overall effectiveness of the emergency management program. This aligns with best professional practices that prioritize evidence-based decision-making and demonstrable improvements in capability, as expected of an associate emergency manager. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on the frequency of exercises without a clear link to specific preparedness goals or a robust AAR process. This can lead to exercise fatigue and a perception that exercises are a bureaucratic burden rather than a valuable learning tool. It fails to meet the professional standard of ensuring exercises are purposeful and yield actionable intelligence for improvement. Another incorrect approach prioritizes the participation of the highest-ranking officials without ensuring that the exercise design effectively tests critical operational functions or that participants are adequately briefed on their roles and objectives. This can result in exercises that are high-profile but low impact in terms of identifying practical deficiencies. It neglects the core purpose of exercises, which is to test and validate plans and capabilities at all relevant levels. A third incorrect approach involves conducting exercises based on generic templates without tailoring them to the specific hazards, risks, and operational context of the jurisdiction. This leads to exercises that may not accurately reflect real-world challenges, rendering the findings less relevant and actionable for improving preparedness. It demonstrates a failure to apply critical thinking and a lack of understanding of the unique preparedness needs of the jurisdiction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach training and exercise design and implementation with a clear understanding of the desired outcomes. This involves 1. Identifying specific preparedness objectives and the risks they are intended to mitigate. 2. Designing exercises that directly test these objectives and risks. 3. Conducting exercises with clear roles, objectives, and evaluation criteria. 4. Rigorously documenting observations and lessons learned through a comprehensive AAR process. And 5. Developing and implementing concrete improvement plans based on AAR findings, feeding this back into training and plan updates. This ensures that every exercise contributes meaningfully to the organization's preparedness posture. Question 11. Benchmark analysis indicates that a community group is expressing significant concern over a potential hazard, citing anecdotal evidence and media reports. As an associate emergency manager, how should you prioritize the assessment of this hazard's likelihood and consequences in relation to other identified risks? Option A. Initiate a formal risk assessment process for the hazard, gathering data on its potential likelihood and consequences, and then engage with the community group to explain the findings and the rationale behind the prioritization of risks. Option B. Dismiss the hazard as a low priority because there is no immediate, visible evidence of its impact on the community at this time. Option C. Immediately elevate the hazard's priority to the highest level due to the vocal concerns of the community group, reallocating resources to address it without further detailed analysis. Option D. Focus solely on historical incidents of this hazard within the jurisdiction, assuming that past occurrences accurately reflect future likelihood and impact. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal risk assessment process for the hazard, gathering data on its potential likelihood and consequences, and then engage with the community group to explain the findings and the rationale behind the prioritization of risks. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the perceived urgency of a hazard with the need for a systematic, evidence-based risk analysis. Emergency managers must avoid succumbing to political pressure or public outcry without a solid foundation in risk assessment principles. The core challenge lies in translating qualitative stakeholder concerns into quantifiable or at least demonstrably reasoned likelihood and consequence estimations, adhering to established emergency management frameworks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, data-informed methodology aligned with the principles of risk analysis as outlined in foundational emergency management doctrine. This involves systematically identifying hazards, assessing their potential likelihood and consequences through established methods, and engaging stakeholders in a process that educates them on the risk assessment findings rather than simply reacting to their initial perceptions. This aligns with the ethical obligation to provide objective, evidence-based guidance and to manage public resources effectively. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the loudest or most influential stakeholder voice fails to adhere to the professional standard of objective risk assessment. It risks misallocating resources to low-impact, low-likelihood events while neglecting more significant threats. This is an ethical failure as it prioritizes political expediency over effective public safety, and a regulatory failure if it bypasses mandated risk assessment protocols. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on historical occurrences without considering evolving environmental factors or potential cascading effects presents an incomplete picture. While historical data is valuable, it may not fully capture future risks, leading to an underestimation of potential consequences or likelihood. This is a professional failing in comprehensive risk analysis and could lead to inadequate preparedness. A third incorrect approach that dismisses a hazard due to a lack of immediate, visible impact ignores the potential for low-probability, high-consequence events. Effective risk analysis requires considering a broad spectrum of possibilities, including those that may not be currently apparent but could have catastrophic outcomes. This is a failure to exercise due diligence in risk identification and assessment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear, multi-step risk assessment framework. This begins with hazard identification, followed by an analysis of likelihood and consequence. Stakeholder input should be sought early and often, but it should inform, not dictate, the risk assessment process. The findings should then be communicated transparently, explaining the methodology and the rationale behind the conclusions. This iterative process ensures that decisions are grounded in sound analysis and are responsive to the needs of the community while adhering to professional and regulatory standards. Question 12. Quality control measures reveal inconsistencies in the ordering and tracking of critical supplies during recent exercises, leading to delays in deployment and difficulties in accounting for inventory. To address this, which of the following approaches best optimizes the resource management process for emergency operations? Option A. Focus solely on securing the lowest unit cost for all requested supplies, prioritizing price over vendor reliability or specific resource suitability for diverse emergency scenarios. Option B. Implement a standardized digital platform for real-time resource request submission, automated tracking of resource status from procurement to deployment, and post-incident inventory reconciliation, integrated with existing financial management systems. Option C. Rely on informal communication channels and verbal confirmations for resource requests and updates to expedite the process, assuming personnel are familiar with common needs. Option D. Authorize emergency managers to bypass standard procurement procedures and directly purchase resources from any available vendor when immediate needs arise, with post-incident audits to follow. The correct answer is B. Implement a standardized digital platform for real-time resource request submission, automated tracking of resource status from procurement to deployment, and post-incident inventory reconciliation, integrated with existing financial management systems. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for resources during an emergency with the long-term implications of resource management, including cost-effectiveness, accountability, and adherence to established procurement protocols. The pressure to act quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise efficiency and compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that resource acquisition supports the emergency response without creating future liabilities or undermining the integrity of the emergency management program. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it emphasizes a systematic and documented process for resource ordering, tracking, and management, aligning with the principles of good governance and emergency management standards. This approach ensures that resources are acquired efficiently, their deployment is monitored, and their use is accounted for, which is crucial for post-event analysis, reimbursement claims, and continuous improvement. Adherence to established procedures, even under pressure, demonstrates professionalism and commitment to responsible stewardship of public or organizational funds and assets. This aligns with the core tenets of emergency management, which prioritize preparedness, effective response, and efficient recovery through structured processes. An incorrect approach that bypasses established procurement channels for expediency, even with good intentions, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It undermines the principles of fair competition, transparency, and accountability mandated by emergency management regulations and procurement laws. Such actions can lead to inflated costs, the acquisition of unsuitable or substandard resources, and potential conflicts of interest. Furthermore, it erodes trust in the emergency management system and can jeopardize future funding or support. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate availability without considering long-term needs or integration into the overall resource management system, fails to optimize resource utilization. This can result in duplication of efforts, inefficient deployment, and an inability to track resource status effectively, hindering coordinated response efforts and post-incident demobilization. It neglects the strategic aspect of resource management, which is vital for sustained operational effectiveness. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes the lowest cost without adequately assessing the quality, reliability, or suitability of the resource for the specific emergency need is also professionally unacceptable. Emergency management requires resources that are fit for purpose and can perform under demanding conditions. Compromising on quality for cost can lead to resource failure during critical moments, directly impacting the effectiveness of the emergency response and potentially endangering lives. This violates the ethical obligation to ensure the safety and well-being of the public or affected population. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the emergency management framework, including relevant regulations and established protocols for resource management. Professionals must first assess the urgency and nature of the resource need. Then, they should consult pre-established resource lists, mutual aid agreements, and approved vendor contracts. If new resources are required, the process should follow documented procurement procedures, even if expedited. Documentation is paramount at every step, from initial request to final disposition. Professionals should also consider the total cost of ownership, including deployment, maintenance, and potential disposal, not just the initial purchase price. Finally, continuous communication with stakeholders and adherence to ethical principles of transparency and accountability are essential for effective and responsible resource management. Question 13. Stakeholder feedback indicates that during a recent large-scale transportation accident resulting in numerous casualties, the coordination of emergency medical services, EMS, response and patient care was hampered by a lack of clear leadership and standardized patient tracking. Considering the regulatory framework for emergency management in the United States, which of the following approaches best ensures compliant and effective medical response and care provision in such a scenario? Option A. Allow the largest and most experienced EMS agency on scene to assume primary command and control of all medical operations, making independent decisions regarding patient allocation and transport without formal integration with other agencies or hospitals. Option B. Focus solely on immediate patient extrication and transport to the nearest available hospitals, deferring any formal patient tracking or reporting until after the immediate crisis has subsided to avoid bureaucratic delays. Option C. Designate a single EMS supervisor to manage all medical aspects of the incident, with communication to hospitals being handled on an ad hoc basis by individual transport units as they arrive at their destinations. Option D. Immediately establish a unified command structure involving all responding EMS agencies, hospital representatives, and public health officials to coordinate patient triage, treatment, transport, and tracking, ensuring adherence to National Incident Management System, NIMS, guidelines and relevant federal regulations for disaster medical operations. The correct answer is D. Immediately establish a unified command structure involving all responding EMS agencies, hospital representatives, and public health officials to coordinate patient triage, treatment, transport, and tracking, ensuring adherence to National Incident Management System, NIMS, guidelines and relevant federal regulations for disaster medical operations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate life-saving needs with the complex logistical and regulatory requirements of coordinating multiple agencies during a mass casualty incident. Mackay. The pressure of a rapidly evolving situation, limited resources, and the need for clear communication among diverse EMS providers, hospitals, and public health entities demands a structured and compliant approach. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to established National Incident Management System, NIMS, principles and relevant federal regulations governing EMS operations during disasters. Specifically, it emphasizes the establishment of a unified command structure, which is crucial for efficient resource allocation, clear lines of authority, and coordinated patient care. This aligns with the Department of Homeland Security's DHS guidance on emergency management and FEMA directives on incident coordination, ensuring that all actions are legally defensible and operationally sound. The focus on interoperable communication systems and standardized patient tracking protocols directly addresses regulatory requirements for data integrity and accountability in public health emergencies. An incorrect approach that bypasses established protocols for patient tracking and reporting would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate regulations requiring accurate documentation of patient disposition and outcomes, hindering post-incident analysis, and potentially impacting reimbursement and future resource planning. It also creates an ethical failure by compromising patient accountability and potentially leading to lost individuals or delayed follow-up care. Another incorrect approach that involves unilateral decision-making by a single EMS agency without consulting or integrating with other responding entities is also professionally unacceptable. This violates NIM's principles of unified command and interagency coordination, leading to fragmented efforts, duplication of resources, and potential conflicts. Such an approach undermines the collective response capability and fails to leverage the strengths of all participating organizations, which is a core tenet of effective emergency management. A third incorrect approach that neglects to establish clear communication channels with receiving hospitals regarding patient surge capacity and capabilities will be professionally unacceptable. This oversight can lead to patient diversions, overcrowding of emergency departments, and compromised care quality, directly contravening federal and state regulations that mandate coordinated patient flow and hospital preparedness during mass casualty events. It also represents an ethical failure to ensure that patients receive care in appropriate facilities. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic application of NIM's principles, starting with the immediate assessment of the incident and the establishment of a command structure. This includes identifying key stakeholders, establishing clear communication protocols, and ensuring that all actions are documented and compliant with relevant federal, state, and local regulations. Prioritizing interoperability, standardized procedures, and continuous situational awareness are critical for effective and legally sound emergency medical response. Question 14. Investigation of a sudden, widespread power outage impacting a large metropolitan area, leading to cascading failures in communication and transportation systems, reveals that the local emergency management agency's resources are severely strained. The emergency manager is aware of a neighboring jurisdiction that has recently upgraded its backup power systems and possesses surplus generators that could significantly alleviate the immediate crisis. The emergency manager has a personal friendship with the emergency manager of the neighboring jurisdiction. What is the most appropriate course of action to secure these critical resources? Option A. Dispatch a team to the neighboring jurisdiction to assess their available generators and negotiate a direct resource transfer, bypassing formal mutual aid channels to ensure rapid acquisition. Option B. Publicly announce the resource shortage and appeal to the neighboring jurisdiction for voluntary donations of generators, hoping for a swift and uncoordinated response. Option C. Initiate a formal request for mutual aid through the established interjurisdictional mutual aid agreement, clearly detailing the emergency, the specific resources needed, and the duration of the request, while also informing the neighboring jurisdiction's emergency manager of the formal request. Option D. Immediately contact the neighboring jurisdiction's emergency manager via personal phone call to request the immediate loan of surplus generators, explaining the dire situation and leveraging the personal relationship to expedite the process. Correct answer is D. Immediately contact the neighboring jurisdiction's emergency manager via personal phone call to request the immediate loan of surplus generators, explaining the dire situation and leveraging the personal relationship to expedite the process. Explanation. This scenario presents a common ethical and professional challenge in emergency management, balancing immediate needs with long-term strategic planning and interjurisdictional cooperation. The core tension lies between a perceived urgent need for resources and the established protocols for requesting and providing mutual aid, which are designed to ensure fairness, sustainability, and accountability. The correct approach emphasizes adherence to established mutual aid agreements and emergency management principles. This involves formally requesting assistance through the designated channels outlined in pre-existing agreements. This method is best professional practice because it upholds the integrity of the mutual aid system, ensures that resource allocation is documented and justifiable, and respects the sovereignty and operational capacity of neighboring jurisdictions. It aligns with the principles of coordinated response, where requests are managed systematically to avoid depleting one jurisdiction's resources to the detriment of another, and to ensure that aid is provided based on assessed need and availability, not just proximity or informal relationships. This systematic approach is often codified in state or regional emergency management plans and frameworks, such as those promulgated by FEMA in the U.S., which guide the establishment and activation of mutual aid. An incorrect approach would be to bypass formal channels and directly solicit resources from a neighboring jurisdiction based on a personal relationship with an emergency manager there. This is professionally unacceptable because it undermines the established mutual aid framework, potentially creating an unfair advantage for one jurisdiction over others who follow protocol. It bypasses necessary approval processes, accountability mechanisms, and the assessment of the requesting jurisdiction's actual need versus the providing jurisdiction's capacity. This could lead to strained interjurisdictional relations, resentment, and a breakdown of trust in the mutual aid system. Furthermore, it may violate specific clauses within mutual aid agreements that mandate formal request procedures. Another incorrect approach would be to unilaterally divert resources from a neighboring jurisdiction without a formal request or agreement. This is a severe ethical and regulatory failure. It constitutes an unauthorized seizure or appropriation of resources, violating principles of interjurisdictional cooperation, and potentially creating a critical resource deficit in the jurisdiction from which resources are taken. This action would likely violate state emergency management laws and any established mutual aid compacts, leading to legal repercussions and irreparable damage to interagency relationships. A third incorrect approach would be to delay the formal request process while informally seeking resources, hoping to resolve the issue without official involvement. This is professionally unsound because it creates a lack of transparency and accountability. It can lead to misallocation of resources, potential duplication of efforts, and a failure to properly document the emergency response, which is crucial for post-event analysis, reimbursement, and future planning. It also risks the situation escalating while waiting for informal solutions, potentially leading to greater harm. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Immediately assessing the nature and severity of the emergency and identifying resource needs. 2. Consulting the relevant mutual aid agreements and emergency operations plans to understand the established procedures for requesting assistance. 3. Initiating the formal request process through the designated channels, providing clear justification for the need and the requested resources. 4. Maintaining open and transparent communication with all involved jurisdictions throughout the process. 5. Documenting all requests, approvals, and resource movements meticulously. Question 15. What factors determine the appropriate scope and timing for the activation and staffing of the Incident Command System's Command Staff and General Staff sections, beyond the initial establishment of the Incident Commander? Option A. The incident's complexity, potential for escalation, and the need for specialized functions such as public information, safety oversight, and interagency liaison, alongside the operational, planning, logistical, and financial demands of the response. Option B. The preference of the incident commander for a fully staffed ICS structure from the moment of their appointment to project an image of complete control. Option C. The historical precedent of how similar incidents have been managed in the past, irrespective of current resource availability or specific incident characteristics. Option D. The availability of personnel with specific ICS titles, regardless of the incident's actual needs or complexity. Correct answer is A. The incident's complexity, potential for escalation, and the need for specialized functions such as public information, safety oversight, and interagency liaison, alongside the operational, planning, logistical, and financial demands of the response. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because the effective implementation of the Incident Command System, ICS, hinges on the accurate and timely establishment of its core components, particularly the incident commander and their immediate staff, and the subsequent development of the general staff. Misunderstanding the foundational roles and responsibilities can lead to a fractured command structure, delayed response, and ultimately, compromised incident management. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the ICS structure evolves appropriately based on the incident's complexity and needs, rather than being rigidly applied without consideration for the operational reality. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the core principles of ICS as outlined in the National Incident Management System, NIMS, and FEMA guidelines, which are the foundational regulatory frameworks for emergency management in the United States. NIMS emphasizes scalability and modularity, meaning the ICS structure should be built out as needed. The incident commander is the single point of authority, and the command staff, PO, safety officer, liaison officer, are appointed based on the incident's requirements for information, safety, and external coordination. The general staff section's operations, planning, logistics, finance/administration, are activated and expanded as the incident's scope and complexity necessitate. This phased and needs-based approach ensures efficient resource allocation and effective management. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate full activation of all general staff sections, regardless of incident size, fails to adhere to the modularity principle of ICS. This can lead to unnecessary overhead, confusion, and misallocation of personnel and resources, violating the efficiency and effectiveness tenets of NIMS. Another incorrect approach that delays the appointment of command staff until significant complexity arises overlooks the proactive role these positions play in managing critical aspects like public perception, responder safety, and interagency coordination from the outset, potentially leading to information gaps, safety hazards, or coordination breakdowns. An approach that allows the incident commander to directly manage all operational tasks without delegating to the operations section, even when the incident grows, undermines the span of control principle and the functional separation of duties inherent in ICS, leading to potential burnout and operational inefficiencies. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough initial assessment of the incident's scope, complexity, and potential impact. This assessment should then guide the phased implementation of ICS. The incident commander is always established first. Command staff are appointed based on immediate needs for information, safety, and external coordination. The general staff sections are activated and staffed progressively as the incident's demands exceed the capacity of the incident commander and command staff to manage directly. This iterative and adaptive process ensures that the ICS structure remains appropriate for the incident at hand, maximizing effectiveness and minimizing waste. Question 16. When evaluating the development of a comprehensive sheltering operations plan, which approach best optimizes process efficiency and community resilience while adhering to established emergency management principles and regulatory frameworks? Option A. Focusing shelter site selection on locations with the lowest perceived risk of damage, without a specific assessment of accessibility challenges for individuals with mobility issues or those lacking personal transportation. Option B. Proactively engaging diverse community stakeholders, including nonprofit organizations and private sector entities, to identify and integrate a wide range of potential sheltering resources and address the specific needs of all population segments. Option C. Deferring detailed sheltering plan development until after a disaster has occurred, allowing for real-time assessment of immediate needs and resource availability. Option D. Primarily relying on existing government-owned facilities, prioritizing those that are most centrally located and require minimal logistical setup, assuming these will meet the majority of sheltering needs. Correct answer is B. Proactively engaging diverse community stakeholders, including nonprofit organizations and private sector entities, to identify and integrate a wide range of potential sheltering resources and address the specific needs of all population segments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because effective sheltering operations require a delicate balance between meeting immediate human needs, ensuring public safety, and adhering to established emergency management principles and regulations. The complexity arises from the need to anticipate diverse population needs, resource limitations, and the dynamic nature of disaster events. Making the right decisions under pressure, with incomplete information, is paramount to saving lives and minimizing suffering. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a proactive, multi-stakeholder engagement strategy that integrates diverse community needs and resource capabilities into the sheltering plan. This aligns with best practices in emergency management, which advocate for comprehensive planning that considers vulnerable populations, accessibility, and the integration of public and private resources. Such an approach ensures that the sheltering plan is not only compliant with relevant regulations, e.g., FEMA National Shelter System guidelines, state and local emergency management plans, but also practical, equitable, and effective in real-world disaster scenarios. It fosters resilience by building trust and collaboration among agencies and community groups, leading to more robust and adaptable sheltering solutions. Incorrect approach is analysis, focusing solely on the capacity of government-owned facilities without considering private sector partnerships or community-based shelters, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach neglects the principle of whole community preparedness and can lead to insufficient sheltering capacity, particularly in large-scale events. It also fails to leverage potentially available resources and may overlook the unique needs of specific populations who might be better served by non-traditional sheltering options. Prioritizing only the most easily accessible locations without a thorough assessment of potential barriers for individuals with disabilities or those without personal transportation is a critical ethical and regulatory lapse. Emergency management regulations often mandate accessibility and inclusivity. This approach risks excluding vulnerable individuals from essential services, directly contravening the ethical imperative to protect all members of the community and potentially violating legal requirements for accessible emergency services. Adopting a reactive approach that only begins detailed planning after a disaster has occurred is a profound failure of professional responsibility and regulatory compliance. Emergency management frameworks, such as those outlined by FEMA, stress the importance of pre-disaster planning, mitigation, and preparedness. A reactive stance demonstrates a lack of foresight, an abdication of duty to protect the public, and a disregard for established protocols designed to minimize loss of life and property. Professional reasoning. Emergency managers must employ a systematic, risk-based approach to sheltering operations planning. This involves 1. Identifying potential hazards and their likely impacts on the community. 2. Assessing the needs of the entire population, including vulnerable groups. 3. Inventorying and evaluating available sheltering resources, including public, private, and nonprofit assets. 4. Developing flexible and scalable sheltering strategies that can be adapted to various scenarios. 5. Engaging stakeholders from all sectors of the community throughout the planning process. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating plans based on lessons learned and changing conditions. This structured decision-making process ensures that plans are comprehensive, compliant, and effective in protecting the public. Question 17. The evaluation methodology shows that a community is considering several mitigation strategies to reduce the impact of recurring flooding. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of comprehensive hazard mitigation planning and regulatory compliance for an associate emergency manager? Option A. Adopting a reactive approach by only considering mitigation measures that have been implemented in similar communities in the past, without conducting a specific risk assessment for the current jurisdiction. Option B. Focusing exclusively on the most technologically advanced structural solutions, such as large-scale levee construction, without extensive public consultation, assuming these will provide the highest level of protection. Option C. Prioritizing the cheapest and quickest mitigation options available, such as temporary sandbagging efforts, without a thorough analysis of their long-term effectiveness or potential for broader hazard reduction. Option D. Implementing a robust community engagement process to identify and prioritize mitigation measures that are technically feasible, economically viable, and socially equitable, while ensuring alignment with federal hazard mitigation planning requirements. The correct answer is D. Implementing a robust community engagement process to identify and prioritize mitigation measures that are technically feasible, economically viable, and socially equitable, while ensuring alignment with federal hazard mitigation planning requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in emergency management, balancing the immediate need for hazard mitigation with the long-term sustainability and community acceptance of proposed measures. The professional challenge lies in identifying mitigation strategies that are not only technically sound and compliant with regulatory frameworks, but also practical, equitable, and supported by the affected population. Failure to consider these multifaceted aspects can lead to ineffective mitigation, wasted resources, and erosion of public trust. The requirement to adhere strictly to the Associate Emergency Manager (AEM) exam-specified regulatory framework, assumed to be U.S. federal regulations for this context, such as those from FEMA, adds another layer of complexity, demanding precise knowledge of applicable laws and guidelines. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a comprehensive, data-driven, and community-engaged process for developing mitigation strategies. This involves 1. Hazard identification and risk assessment, thoroughly understanding the nature, frequency, and potential impact of hazards specific to the jurisdiction, aligning with requirements like those outlined in FEMA Hazard Mitigation Planning Regulations, e.g., 44 CFR Part 201. This ensures that mitigation efforts are targeted and effective. 2. Stakeholder engagement, actively involving local government officials, community leaders, businesses, and residents in the planning process. This ensures that proposed strategies are practical, address local concerns, and have a higher likelihood of successful implementation and long-term maintenance. This aligns with the principles of collaborative governance and public participation, often emphasized in federal grant programs and planning guidance. 3. Feasibility and cost-benefit analysis, evaluating the technical, economic, social, and environmental feasibility of potential mitigation measures. This includes considering the cost of implementation versus the potential reduction in losses, as mandated by many federal funding requirements. 4. Integration with existing plans, ensuring that mitigation strategies are integrated into broader land use planning, zoning ordinances, building codes, and other relevant local and state plans. This promotes a holistic approach to resilience and avoids conflicting policies. 5. Monitoring and evaluation, establishing mechanisms to track the effectiveness of implemented mitigation measures and adapt strategies as needed. This iterative process is crucial for continuous improvement and compliance with ongoing performance requirements. This comprehensive approach represents best professional practice because it is grounded in regulatory mandates for effective hazard mitigation planning, promotes equitable outcomes, and fosters community buy-in, which are essential for the long-term success of any mitigation program. Incorrect approaches analysis, focusing solely on technically advanced solutions without community input, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such an approach may overlook critical local context, leading to strategies that are difficult to implement, maintain, or are perceived as inequitable by the community. This can violate principles of public participation and environmental justice often embedded in federal regulations and grant requirements. Prioritizing low-cost, easily implementable measures without a thorough risk assessment is also a failure. This approach may not adequately address the most significant threats, leading to insufficient protection and potential noncompliance with federal standards for hazard mitigation planning that require a comprehensive assessment of risks and vulnerabilities. Implementing measures based on anecdotal evidence or past practices without current data or scientific validation is another failure. This can result in misallocation of resources and ineffective mitigation, potentially violating requirements for evidence-based decision-making and the use of best available science in hazard mitigation planning. Professional reasoning. Emergency managers should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and the specific hazards facing their jurisdiction. This involves 1. Defining the scope, clearly identifying the hazards, the affected populations, and the geographic area of concern. 2. Information gathering, collecting data on hazard history, vulnerability, and potential impacts, consulting relevant federal guidelines and local data. 3. Stakeholder consultation, engaging all relevant parties to understand their needs, concerns, and perspectives. 4. Option generation, brainstorming a range of potential mitigation strategies, considering various levels of intervention and cost. 5. Evaluation and selection, applying established criteria, including regulatory compliance, cost-effectiveness, feasibility, equity, and community acceptance, to evaluate and select the most appropriate strategies. 6. Implementation planning, developing detailed plans for the execution of selected strategies, including resource allocation, timelines, and responsibilities. 7. Monitoring and adaptation, establishing systems for ongoing assessment of effectiveness and making necessary adjustments. Question 18. The risk matrix shows a high potential impact for a major hazardous materials incident, but a low probability of occurrence, while a moderate wildfire scenario presents a moderate impact with a high probability of occurrence. Which approach best guides the prioritization of emergency management resources and planning efforts? Option A. Prioritize the moderate impact, high probability wildfire scenario because its likelihood makes it a more immediate and frequent concern for the community. Option B. Defer significant resource allocation to both scenarios until more precise data on the exact likelihood and impact of each can be obtained. Option C. Focus resources and planning efforts primarily on the high-impact, low-probability hazardous materials incident due to its catastrophic potential. Option D. Allocate resources and planning efforts proportionally to both the potential impact and the probability of occurrence, recognizing that both factors are critical in determining overall risk. The correct answer is C. Focus resources and planning efforts primarily on the high-impact, low-probability hazardous materials incident due to its catastrophic potential. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an emergency manager to move beyond simply identifying hazards to a nuanced assessment of their potential impact and the likelihood of their occurrence within a specific context. The challenge lies in prioritizing limited resources and developing effective mitigation and response strategies based on a comprehensive understanding of risk, not just the inherent danger of a hazard type. Careful judgment is required to balance the severity of potential consequences with the probability of an event, ensuring that the most significant risks receive the most attention. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with the core principles of emergency management as outlined in FEMA National Incident Management System, NIMS, and relevant state-level emergency management frameworks. NIMS emphasizes a systematic approach to risk assessment, which involves identifying hazards, analyzing their potential impacts, and determining their likelihood. This allows for the development of targeted strategies that are both effective and efficient. By focusing on the intersection of hazard type, potential impact, and likelihood, emergency managers can prioritize resources towards the most probable and impactful threats, ensuring a more resilient community. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect public safety by proactively addressing the most significant risks. An incorrect approach that solely focuses on the inherent severity of a hazard type, without considering its likelihood or specific local context, represents a regulatory and ethical failure. For instance, prioritizing a low likelihood, high consequence technological hazard over a high likelihood, moderate consequence natural hazard might lead to misallocation of resources and leave the community vulnerable to more probable threats. This fails to meet the standard of care expected in emergency management, which demands a balanced and evidence-based approach to risk. Similarly, an approach that ignores the potential for cascading effects or interdependencies between different hazard types, e.g., a wildfire leading to hazardous materials releases, would be a failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment, potentially overlooking critical vulnerabilities. Ethically, this represents a failure to adequately protect the public by not addressing the most pressing risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with comprehensive hazard identification, followed by a detailed analysis of potential impacts across various sectors, e.g., public health, infrastructure, economy. This analysis must then be combined with an assessment of the likelihood of each hazard occurring, considering historical data, environmental factors, and intelligence. The resulting risk assessment, often visualized on a risk matrix, should guide the prioritization of mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery efforts. This iterative process ensures that emergency management plans are dynamic, adaptable, and grounded in a realistic understanding of the threats facing the jurisdiction. Question 19. The control framework reveals that a community's financial preparedness for disasters is a critical component of its overall resilience. Considering the regulatory landscape and best practices for associate emergency managers in the United States, which of the following approaches best ensures a robust and equitable financial recovery strategy following a catastrophic event? Option A. A singular focus on acquiring high-cost private insurance policies for every conceivable disaster scenario, irrespective of community affordability. Option B. The sole development of substantial community financial reserves without exploring insurance mechanisms for risk transfer. Option C. exclusive reliance on the anticipation of federal disaster declaration to fund all post-disaster recovery efforts. Option D, a comprehensive strategy that integrates public insurance programs like the NFIP, encourages private insurance for other perils, and establishes community financial reserves and grant acquisition plans. The correct answer is D, a comprehensive strategy that integrates public insurance programs like the NFIP, encourages private insurance for other perils, and establishes community financial reserves and grant acquisition plans. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an associate emergency manager, AEM, to balance the immediate needs of disaster response with the long-term financial resilience of the community. The AEM must navigate complex insurance landscapes, understand the limitations of various financial preparedness tools, and advocate for policies that promote equitable recovery, all while operating within the specific regulatory framework of the United States, as implied by the AEM designation. The pressure to demonstrate immediate progress in financial preparedness can sometimes overshadow the need for a comprehensive and sustainable approach, making careful judgment essential. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a multifaceted strategy that integrates public and private insurance mechanisms with robust financial preparedness planning. This aligns with best practices in emergency management by acknowledging that no single solution is sufficient. Specifically, it promotes leveraging the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, for flood risk, encouraging private insurance for other perils, and developing community-level financial reserves and grant strategies. This approach is ethically sound as it aims to protect the broadest range of stakeholders and is regulatorily compliant with U.S. frameworks that encourage a layered approach to risk financing and disaster recovery, such as those outlined by FEMA and state-level emergency management agencies. It fosters resilience by ensuring that financial resources are available from multiple sources, reducing reliance on a single, potentially overwhelmed funding stream. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that solely relies on federal disaster declarations for financial recovery is regulatorily and ethically flawed. While federal declarations are crucial, they are reactive and often insufficient to cover all losses, especially for individuals and businesses without adequate insurance. This approach fails to meet the ethical obligation to proactively mitigate financial hardship and is inconsistent with U.S. policy that encourages pre-disaster mitigation and insurance uptake. An approach that prioritizes only the acquisition of expensive private insurance for all potential perils, without considering affordability or accessibility for all community members, is also problematic. While private insurance is a valuable tool, an over-reliance on it can create financial barriers for low-income households and small businesses, leading to inequitable recovery outcomes. This can conflict with ethical principles of fairness and equity in disaster preparedness and response, and may not fully align with the spirit of federal programs designed to support broad-based recovery. An approach that focuses exclusively on building large community financial reserves without exploring insurance options overlooks a critical risk management tool. Insurance transfers risk and can provide immediate liquidity after a disaster that reserves alone might not match. Relying solely on reserves can lead to underestimation of potential losses and may deplete essential operating funds if a catastrophic event occurs, failing to meet the prudent financial management expected of public entities. Professional reasoning. Emergency managers should adopt a decision-making process that begins with a thorough risk assessment, identifying the most probable and impactful hazards. This should be followed by an evaluation of existing financial tools and resources, including public programs, private insurance markets, and internal financial capacities. The next step involves developing a layered financial preparedness strategy that diversifies funding sources and risk transfer mechanisms, ensuring affordability and accessibility for all segments of the community. Finally, continuous review and adaptation of the financial preparedness plan are essential to account for changing risks, market conditions, and regulatory updates. Question 20. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a rapid, initial damage assessment focused primarily on visible structural damage to public infrastructure is the most efficient use of limited resources following a major disaster. But does this approach adequately address the full spectrum of needs for a community's recovery? Option A, no. A comprehensive damage assessment must integrate data on individual and community needs, economic impacts, and environmental concerns, alongside infrastructure damage, to ensure equitable and effective recovery aligned with federal disaster assistance guidelines. Option B. Yes, cost-benefit analysis inherently prioritizes efficiency, and focusing on the most visible and quantifiable damage to public infrastructure provides the clearest justification for immediate federal aid requests. Option C. No, while efficiency is important, the regulatory framework for disaster recovery emphasizes a holistic approach that includes social and economic factors, and a narrow focus on infrastructure alone will likely lead to unmet needs and prolonged recovery. Option D. Yes, the primary goal of initial damage assessment is to quickly identify the most critical infrastructure failures that pose immediate public safety risks, and other needs can be addressed in subsequent, less time-sensitive phases. The correct answer is A. No, a comprehensive damage assessment must integrate data on individual and community needs, economic impacts, and environmental concerns, alongside infrastructure damage, to ensure equitable and effective recovery aligned with federal disaster assistance guidelines. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because effective damage assessment requires balancing immediate needs with long-term recovery, all while adhering to strict regulatory frameworks and stakeholder expectations. The Associate Emergency Manager, AEM, must navigate competing priorities, limited resources, and the imperative for accurate, actionable data to inform critical decisions. The challenge lies in translating raw damage information into a comprehensive needs assessment that is both compliant and effective. Correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, multi-stakeholder process that aligns with the core principles of emergency management as outlined in relevant U.S. federal regulations, such as those derived from the Stafford Act and FEMA guidance. This approach ensures that damage assessment is not merely a cataloging exercise, but a strategic input into the recovery planning process. It emphasizes the involvement of local, state, and federal partners as well as affected communities to ensure that the assessment accurately reflects the scope of damage and the diverse needs of the population. This collaborative and data-driven methodology is crucial for securing appropriate disaster assistance and for building community resilience. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate infrastructure repair without considering the human element or long-term economic impacts fails to meet regulatory requirements for comprehensive disaster recovery planning. Such an approach would likely overlook critical needs like housing, healthcare, and psychological support, leading to incomplete disaster assistance applications and prolonged recovery. Ethically, it neglects the well-being of the affected population. Another incorrect approach that relies exclusively on initial visual inspections without employing standardized assessment methodologies or engaging with affected communities would result in inaccurate and incomplete data. This would violate FEMA guidelines for damage assessment, which mandate standardized procedures to ensure consistency and reliability. The lack of community input would also lead to a failure to identify all critical needs, potentially excluding vulnerable populations from assistance. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy, leading to rushed assessments and the omission of detailed documentation, would be professionally unacceptable. This haste would compromise the integrity of the damage assessment, making it difficult to justify funding requests and potentially leading to audits or the disallowance of disaster relief funds. It also undermines the trust placed in emergency managers to provide reliable information for decision-making. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve establishing clear assessment objectives aligned with regulatory requirements, engaging all relevant stakeholders early and often, utilizing standardized assessment tools and methodologies, ensuring thorough documentation, and continuously validating findings against ground truth and community feedback. This iterative and inclusive process ensures that the damage assessment is robust, compliant, and serves as a solid foundation for effective disaster recovery.